Aisha lived in a small mud house on the edge of Kano. Every morning before sunrise, she went out to gather firewood and vegetables to sell in the market. Her hands were rough from work, her clothes were old, and her back often ached, but she never complained. Life had been hard since her husband died many years ago. People in the village said she was unlucky, but Aisha only smiled and said that life was a gift, even when it was hard. She had no children, no family, and no helper. Yet her heart was full of kindness. When hungry children came by her stall, she would give them small pieces of roasted yam, even when she barely had enough for herself. People sometimes laughed at her generosity, but she never stopped sharing. She believed that kindness always found its way back. One rainy evening, after a long day at the market, Aisha carried her empty basket on her head and walked home. The road was muddy and the wind was cold. The sky flashed with lightning and she could hear thunder rolling in the distance. As she neared the old well outside the village, she suddenly heard a faint cry. At first she thought it was the sound of the wind. But then she heard it again, soft, weak, and desperate. Aisha stopped. Her heart began to race. She held her lantern higher and moved closer to the sound. There, beside the old well, she saw a small bundle wrapped in torn cloth. When she bent down, she gasped. Inside the cloth were two tiny babies, newborn twins. Their faces were wet from the rain and they were shivering. Aisha looked around quickly, calling out into the darkness. "Who is there? Whose children are these?" But there was no answer. Only the sound of the rain and the cries of the babies filled the air. She waited a few moments, hoping someone would come, but no one did. Her heart broke as she looked at the helpless twins. She didn't have much, but she couldn't leave them there to die. With gentle hands, she lifted the babies into her arms. "Oh, my little ones," she whispered, "you are safe now. I will not leave you." She covered them with her scarf, shielding them from the rain, and hurried home. When she reached her house, she quickly lit a small fire. Her room was small, just one bed, a stool, and a few cooking pots, but it was warm. She found an old wrapper, tore it in two, and wrapped each baby tightly. Then she boiled water and warmed some milk she had left from the market. Using a small spoon, she fed the babies one by one, watching their little mouths move slowly. Tears filled her eyes as she looked at them. "Who would abandon such angels?" she whispered. She had always prayed for children, but she never thought her prayers would be answered this way. She smiled softly and said, "You came to me in the rain, and I will never let you suffer again." That night, Aisha didn't sleep. She sat by the fire, holding the twins close to her chest. The rain continued to fall, but she no longer felt the cold. Instead, she felt warmth in her heart, a feeling she hadn't known in years. Every time one of the babies cried, she sang softly, her voice trembling but full of love. By morning the rain had stopped. The sun peeked through the clouds, lighting the small house. Aisha looked down at the babies sleeping peacefully beside her. She smiled and whispered, "Your names will be Kalechi and Chinaza. It means, thank God, and God answers prayers." When she went to the market that day, she told no one about the twins. She was afraid the villagers might tell her to take them to the authorities, and she couldn't bear to lose them. But word spread quickly. One neighbor saw her hanging baby cloth on the line and told another, and soon people began to talk. Some laughed and said, "That poor widow has lost her mind. She can't even feed herself. How will she raise two children?" Others shook their heads and said she was foolish. But Aisha didn't care. She only smiled and said, "God gave them to me and He will help me raise them." Life became even harder after that. She had to buy more food, more clothes, and more firewood. There were days when she went hungry so the twins could eat. Sometimes she walked long distances to find work, leaving the babies with a kind neighbor until she returned. When she came home at night, she would hold them close and whisper prayers over them. The twins grew stronger each day. They smiled when they saw her, and their laughter filled the little house. Aisha often sat and watched them sleep, thanking God for bringing them into her life. Though she was poor, her home was now full of joy. Years later, people in the village would remember that rainy night. They would remember how Aisha, the poor widow who had nothing, became the mother of two abandoned children. But in that moment, all that mattered was the love that began to grow in her heart, the love that would one day change everything. That night, as the moon shone through the cracks in the roof, Aisha looked at the twins beside her and smiled. She whispered, "I may be poor, but I am rich in love. And as long as I breathe, you will never be alone." And with that, she closed her eyes, her heart full of peace, knowing her life had found new meaning through the tiny cries she heard by the well. Aisha woke up every day before sunrise. The sky was still dark and the air was cool. She would quietly light her small fire and boil water before the twins woke up. Her house was tiny but she kept it clean and warm. Kelechi and Chinaza were now old enough to walk, and they often played around the little compound while Aisha prepared food. Life was hard but she never complained. She went to the market with a basket of firewood on her head, walking for miles under the hot sun. She sold vegetables, cooked beans, and washed clothes for others just to make enough money to feed the children. Sometimes she came home with only a few coins but she always found a way to stretch it. At night, when the twins were asleep, she would sit beside their mat and watch them. Their small faces looked peaceful in the dim light of her lantern. She would smile and whisper, "You are my blessing. I have nothing else but I have you." The twins grew quickly. Kelechi was quiet and thoughtful, while Chinaza was lively and full of energy. They were inseparable, always holding hands wherever they went. When one cried, the other would try to comfort them. Their laughter filled the house, making Aisha forget her pain and tiredness. But the villagers were not kind. Many people mocked her behind her back. Some would say, "Look at that foolish woman. She can't even feed herself, yet she carries other people's children." Others laughed and said she had cursed herself with more mouths to feed. Aisha heard their words but she didn't answer. Instead, she prayed silently, asking God to give her strength. She believed that love was greater than wealth. One day, she told herself, these children will grow and bring joy not just to me but to the whole world. The years passed and the struggle grew heavier. When there wasn't enough food, Aisha would quietly serve the twins their portion and pretend she had already eaten. The children were young but they noticed. One evening, Kelechi looked up from his bowl and asked, "Mama, why don't you eat with us?" Aisha smiled weakly and said, "A mother's heart is full even when her stomach is empty." The twins didn't fully understand but they smiled and kept eating. Her words stayed with them for years, buried deep in their hearts. The little family's life was full of sacrifices. Aisha repaired old clothes by candlelight, patched torn sandals, and walked miles to fetch clean water. When it rained, their roof leaked, and the three of them would huddle in one corner, laughing and telling stories until the storm passed. Those nights were hard but they were also full of love. Even though she was poor, Aisha was respected by a few kind souls in the village. The local teacher, Mr. Obi, admired her courage. He often said, "That widow has the heart of gold. She may be poor but her spirit is rich." Sometimes he gave the twins old books and pencils from the school. Aisha always thanked him with deep gratitude. When the twins turned 7, Aisha decided to send them to school, even though she could barely afford the fees. She sold almost everything she owned, her extra pots, her old wrapper, even her husband's last shirt, to pay for their education. "You must learn," she told them. "Education is light, and light chases away darkness." Every morning, Kelechi and Chinaza walked barefoot to school, carrying a small bag made from old cloth. They studied hard, always remembering how their mother suffered for them. The teachers loved their manners and called them the twins of hope. But Aisha's health began to fail. The years of hard work and hunger had weakened her body. Sometimes she coughed through the night, and her hands shook when she tried to carry heavy loads. Yet she refused to stop working. "If I rest," she would say, "who will feed my children?" The villagers began to notice. Some felt pity for her and started helping in small ways, offering her leftover food or helping carry her goods to the market. Others still mocked her, saying she would die poor. But Aisha no longer cared what people thought. All she wanted was to see her children grow strong and happy. One day, as she sat outside her hut watching the twins do their homework, she smiled through her tiredness. "My children," she said softly, "life will test you but never stop being kind. Remember, kindness brought you to me." Chinaza put down his pencil and hugged her. "Mama, when we grow up, we will build you a big house and buy you plenty of food." Aisha laughed, her eyes full of tears. "You don't need to build me a mansion," she said. "Just build good hearts. That will be enough for me." Her words touched them deeply. From that day, Kelechi and Chinaza worked even harder. They helped her fetch water, cook, and sell goods at the market. They became known as polite, hard-working children, and people began to admire Aisha's strength. Even when her clothes were old and her feet were cracked, she stood tall. She carried herself with quiet pride because she knew she had done what few others would have. She had given life and love to children the world had thrown away. And though her body grew weaker each year, her spirit remained strong. Every night before she slept, she whispered a prayer of thanks. "God," she would say, "thank you for giving me these children. They are my joy, my reason to live." The twins would often hear her soft voice in the dark, and it filled their hearts with love and determination. They promised themselves that one day they would repay her kindness. In the small, quiet corners of their home, love was their wealth. And though the world saw them as poor, they were richer than most, for they had each other. The years went by, and the twins slowly grew into strong, hard-working young adults. Kelechi became calm and thoughtful, while Chinaza was full of energy and determination. Even though they were still poor, they carried a fire inside them, the desire to make their mother proud. Their days began before the sun rose. Together they would help Aisha carry firewood to the market. She could no longer lift heavy loads, so the twins did most of the work. After helping her, they hurried to school, sometimes with empty stomachs. Yet they never complained. Their mother's sacrifices gave them strength. When school ended, the twins often went to the roadside, where a single street light stood. That was where they studied every night. They had no electricity at home, but that dim light was enough for them. Many times, people passing by would stop and stare at the two children bent over their books, reading with deep focus while mosquitoes buzzed around them. One evening, Aisha walked quietly to where they sat and watched them from afar. She smiled proudly. Her heart felt warm even though her body was tired. She whispered a prayer under her breath. God, please bless their hands and guide their steps. Then she turned back home, leaving them to chase their dreams. Life was not easy. The twins wore the same clothes for years and shared one pair of shoes between them. When Kelechi needed them for school, Chinaza walked barefoot, and when Chinaza needed them, Kelechi waited for his turn. Still, they never stopped smiling. They had learned from their mother that joy did not come from what one had, but from what one believed. Their teachers loved them because they were respectful, humble, and always eager to learn. One of their teachers, Mrs. Ibrahim, would often tell her colleagues, "Those twins will go far. You can see the light in their eyes." She sometimes gave them leftover food or lent them books from her shelf. At home, Aisha always welcomed them with a warm smile, even when there was little to eat. She would serve their meal, sometimes just yam and salt, and say, "Eat, my children. Tomorrow will be better." Her voice carried hope, and the twins believed her every word. One afternoon, as Kelechi helped his mother arrange firewood, he said, "Mama, when I grow up, I want to build a big house for you so you never have to work again." Aisha laughed softly. "My son," she said, "I don't need a big house. Seeing you happy will be my biggest home." Her words stayed with them. They carried her wisdom everywhere they went. The turning point came when a teacher from the city visited their village school. His name was Mr. Adeyemi, and he had come to look for talented students for a scholarship program. He gave all the students a test. The twins, nervous but determined, wrote with all their hearts. A week later, their names were announced as the top students in the region. The whole school celebrated. Aisha couldn't believe it when she heard the news. She cried tears of joy and held her children close. "You see," she said between tears, "God has answered my prayers. My children will see the world I never could." The scholarship covered everything: tuition, books, even their living expenses. For the first time, Kelechi and Chinaza saw a future brighter than the oil lamps they used to study under. As the day of departure drew near, Aisha's heart was full of both pride and sadness. She had spent years dreaming of this moment, yet now that it had come, she didn't want to let them go. She spent the night before their journey packing their few belongings: a worn shirt, a pair of sandals, and a small bag of groundnuts for the road. Before sunrise, the twins stood beside her, ready to leave for the city. The bus waited on the dusty road, engine humming. Aisha looked at them with tears in her eyes. "My children," she said softly, "never forget where you came from. Remember the nights we had nothing but faith. And remember, no matter how high you rise, stay humble." Chinaza hugged her tightly, tears streaming down her face. "We'll make you proud, Mama," she whispered. Kelechi tried to smile, but his voice shook. "We'll come back for you, Mama. This is just the beginning." Aisha nodded, her heart full. She raised her hands in prayer as they boarded the bus. As it drove away, she stood there watching until it disappeared into the distance. Her eyes were wet, but her lips curved into a smile. "Go, my children," she whispered. "Fly high." When she returned home, the house felt empty. The laughter that once filled the small hut was gone. But in that silence there was peace. She knew her sacrifices were not in vain. Every piece of wood she had carried, every meal she had skipped, every tear she had shed, it had all led to this. Weeks turned into months. Letters began arriving from the twins. They told her about the city, about the tall buildings and bright lights, about how different life was. They studied hard and always sent her little money whenever they could. Each time she received their letters, she would read them over and over, smiling and thanking God. Her neighbors began to notice the change. Some who once mocked her now greeted her with respect. They said, "Aisha, your children are making us proud." And she would smile humbly replying, "It is God who lifts the poor." Even as she grew older and her steps slowed, Aisha never stopped working. She still went to the market, still helped others and still prayed for her children every night. In the city, Kelechi and Chinaza carried their mother's lessons in their hearts. They studied day and night, pushing themselves through every challenge. They never forgot the woman who had saved them from the cold and raised them with love stronger than any wealth. And so, though they were far apart, a thin invisible thread of love connected them, one that no distance could ever break. The morning sun rose gently over the small village, painting the mud houses with soft golden light. Birds sang from the trees, and the smell of cooking fires filled the air. It was an ordinary day for everyone, except for one woman. Aisha sat outside her small house, her hands shaking as she tied a bundle of firewood. Her hair was now gray and deep lines traced her face, showing the years of hard work and struggle she had endured. The world around her had changed. The once dusty road was now smoother, new buildings had appeared near the market, and the young children she once knew had grown up and started families of their own. But Aisha's little mud house stood just as it always had, simple, quiet, and full of memories. Inside, a small picture of two young children still hung on the wall, drawn years ago by Chinaza when she was little. Aisha would look at it every day, whispering prayers for her twins. They had gone far away, and though they sent her letters and money, she had not seen them in years. Sometimes she wondered what they truly looked like now, if they had families, if they still remembered her laugh, her stories, her love. That morning, she felt a strange peace in her heart, as if something good was about to happen. She sat outside her door, sipping her tea, when suddenly the sound of engines echoed through the village. Everyone stopped what they were doing and turned to look. Two shiny black cars were driving slowly down the narrow road. Children ran after them, shouting and laughing. The villagers whispered among themselves. "Who are they?" one man asked. "They must be rich people visiting from the city," said another. The cars stopped right in front of Aisha's house. Dust rose in the air as the doors opened. Out stepped two people, a tall man in a fine suit and a woman in an elegant dress. They looked graceful and confident, but their eyes were filled with emotion. No one recognized them. They were strangers to the village, or so everyone thought. The villagers gathered quietly, curious and amazed. The man looked around for a moment, then his eyes fell on Aisha. She was standing now, holding her walking stick, her lips trembling. Slowly, both the man and the woman walked toward her. When they reached her, they knelt down on the ground in front of her, just as they had done when they were children. The woman's voice broke as she said, "Mama, it's us. Kelechi and Chinaza." The crowd gasped in disbelief. Aisha stared at them for a long moment, her eyes wide with shock. Her heart pounded as she looked at their faces, grown and changed, yet somehow still familiar. Then her tears began to fall. She reached out with trembling hands and touched their cheeks. "My children," she whispered. "My babies, you came home." They both held her tightly, tears streaming down their faces. For a long moment, the three of them just stayed like that, mother and children reunited after 25 long years. The villagers watched silently, their hearts full. Some began to cry too. Kelechi gently took her hand and said, "Mama, we never forgot you. Everything we are today is because of you." Chinaza nodded, wiping her tears. "You gave us life when no one else wanted us. You are our everything." Aisha smiled weakly. "Ah, my children," she said softly, "I always knew God would bless you. Look at you now." They laughed and cried together. The villagers, still amazed, started to whisper among themselves. "So the twins she raised were not ordinary after all," one woman said. "They are great people now." Soon, word spread through the village. Aisha's children had returned, and they were successful beyond imagination. Kelechi was now a doctor, helping people across the country. Chinaza had become a respected lawyer, fighting for justice for the poor. Both of them had built their lives on the values their mother had taught them: hard work, kindness, and faith. Kelechi looked around the small house and felt tears in his eyes. The same cracked walls, the same clay pots, and the same old bed where their mother had once told them bedtime stories. "Mama," he said softly, "we're going to fix everything. You won't struggle anymore." Aisha smiled. "I don't need riches, my son," she said gently. "Seeing you both here again, that is my greatest blessing." But the twins had already decided. That very week they began rebuilding the house. The villagers watched as workers came from the city, bringing materials and machines. In a few days the old hut was replaced with a beautiful new home, bright, clean, and comfortable. Aisha's neighbors could hardly believe their eyes. People came to visit her, bringing gifts and asking questions. "Aisha," one of them said, "you are truly blessed. You raised 2 children no one wanted, and now they are your pride." Aisha would smile and reply, "It was never me, it was God. I only gave them love." That evening, a big celebration filled the village. Music played, children danced, and food was shared with everyone. For the first time in years, Aisha's home was full of laughter again. She sat quietly on her new porch, watching her children laugh with the villagers. Her heart was full. Kelechi came to her and said, "Mama, we want to build a school here in your name, for children who have no one, just like we once had no one." Aisha's eyes shone with pride. "That is the best gift you could ever give," she said. "Let it be a place where love grows." The villagers cheered when they heard the plan. It was not just a school, it was a promise of hope for generations to come. As night fell, Aisha looked at her children one more time. She saw in them the babies she once found by the well, the same innocent faces, now full of strength and purpose. She whispered a prayer of thanks and smiled. She had once been a poor widow with nothing. But that night, surrounded by love, she felt richer than any queen. And as the stars appeared above the quiet village, Aisha whispered softly to herself, "God is good. My story was never about what I lost, it was always about what I found." The village slept peacefully that night, but in that small home, 3 hearts beat together again after a lifetime apart. Tears rolled down Aisha's wrinkled cheeks as she sat between Kelechi and Chinaza. Her trembling hands held theirs tightly, afraid that if she let go, they might disappear like a beautiful dream. But this was no dream. Her children had returned, strong, successful, and full of love. The twins hugged her again, and Aisha could feel their hearts beating with joy and gratitude. The villagers who once mocked her now stood outside her house, watching with admiration and shame. They remembered the days they laughed at her for raising children who were not her own, calling her foolish and stubborn. But now the same people whispered, she was right all along. Her love brought her blessings. Kelechi and Chinaza began to rebuild her world. They told her, "Mama, you gave us everything when you had nothing. Now it's our turn to give you everything you deserve." And they meant every word. Within weeks, builders arrived from the city. The old clay house that once leaked during the rains was replaced with a beautiful modern home. It had wide windows that let the sunlight in, soft chairs, and a warm kitchen that always smelled of Aisha's favorite soup. The day Aisha moved into her new home, she couldn't stop crying. She touched the walls gently and said, "This is too much, my children." But Kelechi smiled and said, "Mama, this is still not enough to repay your love." Chinaza nodded, adding softly, "We can never repay you, but we can honor you." And they did. In the months that followed, Kelechi and Chinaza began 2 great projects in the village, a school and a hospital, both named Aisha Foundation. The school became a place for children who could not afford education. The hospital treated poor villagers without charging them a single coin. Every wall carried Aisha's name, a reminder of the love that had once changed 2 abandoned lives. When the school was completed, the twins organized a big ceremony. People from neighboring villages came to see it. Children sang songs, drums echoed in the air, and Aisha sat in the front row, dressed in a fine new wrapper and a bright headscarf. Her eyes sparkled as she looked around, her heart overflowing with joy. The village chief stood up and said, "Today we honor Mama Aisha, not because she was rich, but because she gave love when she had none to spare. Her kindness raised 2 children who are now changing lives across this land." Everyone clapped and cheered. Aisha could hardly speak. When the microphone was handed to her, she simply said, "My children were once orphans, but God made them my blessing. Love is the greatest gift we can give, it never dies." Later, a journalist came from the city to interview the twins. "Why did you return?" he asked. "You could have stayed in the city and lived in comfort." Kelechi smiled gently. "Because love raised us when the world left us," he said. "Our mother taught us that true wealth is not in gold or money, it is in love and kindness. We came back to give that love to others." Chinaza added softly, "We wanted to show the world that the woman everyone ignored gave us everything that truly matters." Their words touched everyone who heard them. The story of Aisha and her twins spread across the country. Newspapers wrote about the poor widow who had once been mocked but was now celebrated as a symbol of faith and courage. People traveled from far away to meet her, to thank her, or to ask for her prayers. Despite all the attention, Aisha remained humble. She still woke up early every morning to pray and sit outside her new house, watching children in neat uniforms walk to school. Sometimes she would wave at them and say, "Learn well, my children. The future is bright for those who believe." The twins visited her often. Though they now lived busy lives in the city, they never missed a chance to spend time with her. Every visit was filled with laughter, stories, and old memories. Kalechi would bring her favorite fruits, and Chinaza would cook with her in the kitchen just like they did when they were little. One evening, as the sun dipped below the trees and the sky turned orange, Aisha sat outside her house with the twins beside her. The air was calm, and the sound of children laughing echoed from the school nearby. She looked at them and said softly, "Do you remember when we had nothing to eat but hope?" They both laughed through tears and nodded. "We remember, Mama," Chinaza said. "And we will never forget." Aisha smiled and looked at the horizon. "God has been good," she whispered. "He gave me children when I had none, and he made them my pride." That night, the stars shone brighter than ever. The village slept peacefully, surrounded by the blessings her love had created. Aisha knew her journey had not been easy, but as she listened to the distant sound of laughter from her school and hospital, her heart was full. She had lived a life of purpose, one that would be remembered for generations. In her final years, Aisha was never alone. People visited her daily, students from her school, mothers from the hospital, neighbors who once doubted her but now called her Mama of the Nation. She became a symbol of what love can do, even in poverty. When she sat by her window, she often saw the sign at the gate of the foundation that read, "Built in honor of Mama Aisha, whose love turned tears into hope." And every time she saw it, she smiled, whispering softly, "It was all worth it." Aisha lived the rest of her life surrounded by love, respect, and peace. Her story continued to inspire many long after she was gone. People told their children about the poor widow who once adopted 2 unwanted babies, children who grew up to change the world with love. And in every heart that heard her story, a seed of kindness was planted, just as Aisha had always wished.